You know, when we think of Antarctica, we picture this pristine, untouched wilderness, right? A whole continent that's supposed to be dedicated to peace and science. But what if that's just the cover story? Declassified documents tell a very different tale. It's a story of military ambition, Cold War paranoia, and a landmark treaty that was secretly a license to spy. So let's pull back the curtain on what was really happening on the ice.
So that's the real question we're digging into here. Was Antarctica this pure hub of scientific discovery, or was it actually one of the most remote and most high-stakes battlefields of the Cold War? Okay, so the official story, the one everyone was told, it all started with science. In the mid-1950s, the entire world was getting ready for this massive, totally unprecedented collaborative effort.
It was called the International Geophysical Year, or IGY, and this was a huge deal. You had 40 nations all agreeing to work together to study the planet. And the crown jewel of the whole thing? Antarctica. The public image was all about peaceful cooperation. Let's leave politics at the door and just do science for the good of all mankind.
The American side of things was called Operation Deep Freeze, and its stated goal was 100% scientific. You know, map the ice, figure out the weather, study the weird fish. That was the story anyway. But it wasn't the whole story, not by a long shot.
To get to the real story, we have to rewind the clock, about a decade, to a time when the continent wasn't crawling with scientists, but with soldiers.
Think about this. World War II ends in 1945. The entire planet is exhausted. And just 1 year later, the United States launches Operation Highjump. This wasn't some small research trip. This was a full-blown military deployment. And the scale of this thing was just staggering. We're talking a task force with 4,700 US Navy sailors, 13 ships, 23 aircraft. To this day, it's the largest military force ever sent to Antarctica. So you have to ask, what on earth were they really doing down there?
Well, the declassified objectives tell a very different story from that science for peace stuff later on. This was about training for defense, testing military gear in the freezing cold, learning how to build air bases on ice, and, this is the big one, extending US sovereignty. This wasn't an expedition, this was a land grab.
And the guy in charge, Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, he didn't mince words. He said it plain as day. We go south to learn how to conquer the North Polar areas militarily. Antarctica was a training ground. The real target was the Soviet Union, and the skills they were learning down south were meant for a future war in the Arctic North.
Right, and you can't talk about the Cold War without talking about the Soviets. Just as the IGY was kicking off, a new player arrived on the continent. And believe me, Washington's planners went on high alert.
So the Soviet Union announces they're going to participate in the big scientific year, and they start setting up their own bases. But where they put them, well, it wasn't random. They planted themselves right in the middle of territory that was claimed by Australia, a key US ally.
Now, you gotta hand it to them, the Soviets were clever. They named their main base Mirny, which actually means peaceful. But Australia wasn't buying it for a second. They were terrified these scientific outposts were really just cover for secret missile sites and submarine bases pointed right at them.
The US wasn't just going to sit back and watch. They immediately built their own station in East Antarctica, and its mission wasn't just science. A key objective, right from the start, was to keep a very close eye on what the Soviets were up to. The chessboard was officially set.
So, tensions are rising. You've got two superpowers staring each other down on this frozen continent. The world needed a solution before things got out of hand, and the answer was a landmark treaty that had a very hidden purpose.
On paper, the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 is this incredible achievement of diplomacy. It demilitarized the entire continent, banned nukes, and guaranteed freedom of scientific research. It basically turned Antarctica into a giant, peaceful, international science park.
But then you find a declassified CIA memo from 1963, and it reveals the real game. It states, flat out, that the US initiated the treaty as a device to obtain the right of surveillance of USSR Antarctic stations. Let that sink in. The entire architecture of peace and science, this celebrated treaty, was, from the CIA's perspective, an instrument of espionage. It was a brilliant diplomatic move that gave them the legal cover to go anywhere and see anything the Soviets were doing.
So, you've got this brand new authority. How do you actually use it? Well, the plan was two-pronged. You needed eyes on the ground, And you needed a revolutionary new capability from way, way up above.
The on-the-ground plan was simple, and it used the treaty's own words. The U.S. would just designate some official observers, announce, hey, we're coming over to inspect your stations, and then send teams right into their main bases, like Mirny and Vostok.
And the Soviets? They played it cool. Officially, they said they saw a little need for all that, claiming it was just too expensive. Now, was that a bluff? Or did they just want to avoid everyone snooping on everyone? Hard to say.
But here's the thing. Those ground inspections were only one part of the plan. At the very same time, the CIA was perfecting a brand new, revolutionary way to spy from a place no one could ever reach: outer space. And this was the real key to unlocking the continent's secrets.
It was called Project Corona, the world's very first spy satellite program. And through the 1960s, it gave the US this incredible eye in the sky, snapping nearly 1 million pictures of Soviet nuclear sites, submarine bases, airfields, all over the world. For the CIA, no secret was safe.
And you have to realize, the exact same massive intelligence network that was tracking every single move in the Kremlin was also pointed directly at Antarctica. The continent wasn't some special scientific sanctuary, it was just another target, fully integrated into the CIA's global surveillance grid.
And all this brings us to one final, kind of chillin' question. The Cold War is over, but Antarctica's strategic importance has only grown. And that treaty, the one designed as a tool for espionage, it's still in force. So you have to wonder, what secrets from back then are still frozen under all that ice, and what new ones are being kept today?